For as much as we love the gaming industry, there's no denying that it has a penchant for bad ideas even worse than this shirt-on-shirt combination. Even back in the golden days of the NES, there was always the feeling that publishers didn't quite know what players wanted, which occasionally resulted in abominations like the Virtual Boy or the Power Glove. Unfortunately though, even in 2018, it doesn't seem any more convincing that the industry knows what it's doing. Fortunately, most WTF decisions the industry makes are quietly canned when the publishers realize that players don't actually want them, but sometimes they stick with them for far longer than anybody wanted. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 9 times the video game industry had no idea what the f*** it was doing.
But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to stay notified. Ding, ding, done.
Number 9. Chasing the Wii with the KINECT and Move. It's easy to forget how much of a big deal the Nintendo Wii was back in the day. Far eclipsing both the Xbox 360 and the PS3 in terms of sales, it didn't take long for both Sony and Microsoft to try to get in on the family-friendly market. Unfortunately, both companies realized the appeal of motion controls way too late in the game, with every family on the planet more or less enjoying the Wii for at least 3 Christmases before Sony and Microsoft got back on board. The Move revolution was dropped by Sony faster than they killed the Vita, while Microsoft botched the original Kinect and then gave it a second go with the release of the Xbox One, only to quietly can it another year later. Number 8. Assuming there was no market for horror. Sometime in the late 2000s, video game publishers just decided that horror games were dead. Without seemingly any evidence pointing to the unpopularity of the genre, the biggest publishers began to retrofit their survival horror franchises into bombastic horror titles. For years, the biggest companies insisted that there was no market for horror experiences. All the while, a little platform called Steam was seeing a huge boom in independent genre releases that were completely tearing up the charts. Even then, publishers were slow to admit that there was any demand for these scares, with it only being in the past few years with releases like Alien Isolation and, of course, Resident Evil 7 that they finally caught on to the fact that, wait, no, the market never disappeared. They finally realized that players didn't go away, it was just that good horror games did. Number 7. Phasing out split screen. Before the glory days of online gaming, the only way that players could get together and play their favorite games with one another, unless you had a bunch of extra consoles and didn't mind wires being all around the living room, was through split screen. But it wouldn't be right to say that split screen was only popular because online gaming hadn't been invented yet. Despite its myriad of pros though, as the years have worn on, developers have slowly moved further and further away from the once standard feature. Every company has their excuse as to why, but the cynical reason remains obvious. Why would they want to sell one copy to one family member where everyone can play it, when they can sell a copy to every single one of them? Fortunately, publishers have recently waned a little bit, with the likes of A Way Out proving just how powerful split-screen experiences can be. Number 6. Charging ahead with online-only ideas. In the early days of the 2010s, the video game industry was charging full steam ahead on the assumption that all games should require an internet connection just to work. Why that might not be a terrible idea in itself, all goodwill was squandered with the announcement of the Xbox One and the fact that you couldn't share games with others or play offline. The final nail in the coffin was the arrogant way Microsoft approached this though, telling naysayers that if they couldn't play online, then they should stick with the Xbox 360 because the new console wasn't for them. Great way to treat your customers, guys. Of course, they eventually went back on their online-only design, but that was only after Sony showed them that the world wasn't ready for their new vision and that everyone just loves sharing games with their friends. Number 5. Messing up remasters of old games. Even though the idea of remasters has taken a right kicking over the past few years, there's no denying that when done well, they can offer new and improved versions of old games that everyone loves, and can occasionally even solve problems that the originals couldn't. Unfortunately, most publishers see these re-releases as quick cash grabs, wanting to milk a franchise for all it's worth whilst putting in as little effort as possible. But it's the overpricing that's proved to be the real sticking point. For instance, there was no reason at all why the bundled remasters of Marvel Ultimate Alliance 1 and 2 was being sold for 50 quid when great remakes like Ratchet & Clank were being sold for 30. Sometimes it gets even worse than that though, and it becomes evident that publishers have absolutely no respect for either the games they're remastering or the fans who are clamoring for them. Just look at how Activision rolled out Modern Warfare Remastered. Number 4. Thinking nobody buys single-player games anymore. Just like it did with horror games before it, at some point the industry just decided that single-player games are dead. Perhaps down to the massive success of certain blockbuster multiplayer games, looking at you, Halo and Call of Duty 4, publishers decided to cram online suites into their story-driven games whether they needed them or not. However, this idea quickly evolved into something far more insidious after the release of the Xbox One and PS4, with some big releases like Titanfall, Star Wars Battlefront, and the upcoming Black Ops 4 shipping without a single-player campaign at all. All of these games have received a massive backlash though, and it's allowed titles like God of War, Breath of the Wild, and Wolfenstein to slip in the cracks in the market and reassert the fact that single-player games aren't dead. The industry has started to take notice a little bit, but we're still a ways off if Black Ops 4's announcement is anything to go by. Number 3. Online passes. Back when second-hand game sales was seemingly killing the industry, publishers decided that the best way to entice players to buy new was to lock off content that they otherwise got for free. That meant that for a while games shipped with an online pass, essentially a paywall that meant players had to pony up for a new copy of the game if they wanted to do crazy things like play online. Crazy, I know. This didn't just affect multiplayer games though. In the likes of story-driven games like Arkham City, entire chapters and playable characters were cordoned off for players who didn't buy the game new. It turned out though that restricting players from important content they usually get for free wasn't the best idea, I know, and it meant publishers dropped the idea of the pass altogether a few years later. Number 2. Trying to push paid mods. One of the most pressing problems with bigwig publishers is that they're always trying to monetize things that are usually free. We saw it with the implementation of online passes, but by far the worst example of it recently has been publishers trying to get you to pay for mods. The modding community has been huge for decades, and these player-driven creations keep fans returning to titles for years after they first ship. Obviously, publishers can't fathom the idea of players continuing to play a game without also continuing to pay for it, which has led to an attempt to capitalize on this fan-made content by charging for it. It hasn't quite worked out, with some ventures like Bethesda's Creation Club completely falling on its arse, but it might not stop publishers from trying this again in the future. Number 1. Thinking consoles were dead. Believe it or not, there was a time in the twilight of the Xbox 360 era that everyone thought games consoles as we know them today were over. More of a problem though, the people who actually made these consoles also thought that was the case. Believing that the time of dedicated gaming machines was up, Microsoft attempted to appeal to everyone by creating an all-in-one entertainment system that focused on TV, film, and streaming as much as it did video games. Obviously, this death of consoles fear-mongering was completely silenced in 2013 when both Sony and Microsoft released their new machines to an eager audience. The PS4 was obviously a ridiculous success, and even Microsoft's controversial Xbox One outpaced the sales of the 360 at that time in its lifespan. Since then, both companies have returned to a gamer-centric approach, and it's clear that consoles are here to stay. So that's our list. Let me know in the comments below if I missed any times that the video game industry got it completely wrong, and don't forget to give us a like, share, subscribe, and all that jazz. Either way though, I've been Josh, you've been watching What Culture, and I'll see you soon. Bye!
Gosh, can you believe that that person said that about that particular video on that entry? I sure can't. But you should like, share and subscribe below anyway. And also, the people who made this video, they're right here. Go follow them and give them some love. Also, there's more content, probably above my head. Check it out. Or don't. 50-50.